All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hai. I'm co-founder of Affluence, which is the company behind Matrix. So hopefully everyone is here today because you're interested in learning more about Matrix and how we can help you focus on high impact tasks. And thank you for spending your time with me. What I want to bring you your attention to is that one, this webinar is recorded, so if there's something that you missed or you want to review it later, you can always watch it. I'll send a copy out to you afterwards. And the second thing is that there's a chat section here inside the Teams webinar where you can send me messages, and I'll try my best to address those questions. So this is one of your opportunities to, if you need some clarity or if there's something that I can go a little bit in more details, I'd be happy to do that. And if not, I can always follow up. My email, hi@affluence, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions whatsoever. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So are you always focused on work with the most impact? That's a question that I ask many of the customers I've talked to. So over the past decade, I've talked to thousands of customers that use Matrix across all spectrum of work. Three challenges that our customers see all the time. One, team members have trouble understanding what's priority right now. And the challenge around there is that more so than ever before, we have more things to do than the resources to track them. So what that means is not only are you challenged by understanding where you should focus your time, team members are actually not able to have that alignment either. And so when you have multiple projects, how do you decide what to work on? And because of the same challenge in having so many different projects, it's getting harder and harder to keep track on the status of work across all these different areas of responsibilities. And when we talk about areas of responsibilities, we're talking about everything from your daily work to your personal life, as well as to your goals, right? And your goals might be overarching, and it actually spans across both work and life as well as your career. And then finally, we're getting more and more stressed out from having communication from so many different places. This is something that I can speak to because, every morning I look at dozens, maybe 100 new emails that's coming in. And at the same time, I'm getting messages in Teams and chat and so forth. So it's really hard to be on top of all of that. And so these are challenges that, if you're not affected by one of these, then you're actually very unique among your peers. So Party Matrix is designed to tackle some of these issues. So Party Matrix is a comprehensive email, priority, and project management software. And in particular, what we do is we help both individuals and teams better manage emails, conduct more efficient meetings, and to get real-time status updates on projects and priorities. One of the things I want to emphasize is Party Matrix is a priority management software. It's not just a project management software. It's not just a task management software. At the end of the day, Party Matrix is about managing priorities. And priorities means these are the things you should focus your time on. These are the things you should really be addressing at any moment in time. So how does Party Matrix tackle these challenges that I mentioned in the beginning? So first, Party Matrix uses the 4-quadrant methodology, which I'll dive into a little bit more details, to promote effective prioritization. If you do not understand what you need to work on, then there's no matter how well you do the work that you do, you're not going to meet your goal. And then second, Party Matrix provide many different views on the information that you have, the tasks that you have, the emails, the meetings, the priorities that you have, to understand what needs to be done within the right context. And then finally, Party Matrix integrates with systems that you already use. In particular, we're probably the most integrated solutions inside Microsoft Teams and Outlook for effective email and task prioritization. Again, we'll go into each of these in more details with the demo and the product presentation. So what makes Party Matrix different? First, it's the only project email and meeting management software that is Microsoft 365 security certified across the web app, Teams app, and Outlook app. One of the things that I'm really excited about is actually we're leveraging AI more and more to help teams and individuals achieve their goals. That's what I would love to show you today, because it's not one of those things that's really obvious yet, but once you realize the potential that exists there, hopefully we can actually move you forward towards meeting your short-term as well as your long-term goals. And then the other thing we do is actually we think about people, and we call it people-centric collaboration. And what I mean by that is it's what you're doing whenever you're working on something that's important. You're typically not working on it in the context of a project. You're doing it for somebody else, right? You're doing either for a peer, for your manager, for your client or your customer. And so Party Matrix creates this different view on everything that you have to do within the context of people. And then finally, Party Matrix is available as a SaaS software, a HIPAA compliant solution, an Azure government cloud solution, as well as managed private Azure deployments for enterprise customers. If any of those things interest you and you have questions around that, please feel free to reach out to us. So let's talk about the philosophy and the fundamentals, core concept behind Party Matrix. There's a famous quote attributed to President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And what's really interesting about this is that the gist of it is that when you started your morning, right? Now I'm talking literally, just think about your morning today. When you looked at those emails that came in, how many of those emails were actually important? And how many of those emails, if you were to respond to all of them right away, would actually further your goals for this quarter or for this year, or for the next 5 years? So what happens is that every single day, we're getting new data that's coming in, new tasks that requires our attention, but it's actually pulling us away from actually what truly matters. And I would argue that a very, very small portion of the things that's coming in that is actually driving towards that primary goal that you have. And at the same time, the things that are really important is actually always in the background, and it's so subtle, and it's there, and that's where you really should be planning for and think about. So one of the things I like to do is I like to ask the audience to do this exercise, which is take out a piece of paper and write down all the things you have to do. Now you can write down, both your work goals as well as your life goals or your personal goals, whatever that may be. And just start noting it down and write it down. And now you have one long list. Now, how long is that list? Is it 5 items? If it's 5 items, that's actually not too bad. That means you can probably work on any of those things that actually doesn't really matter too much. But what if it's 20? What if it's 30? And what if it's more time consuming to get those things done than the resources, the time you actually have available to address them? Now, if you have a list like that and it's not organized, what do you work on? Do you work on the top? Do you work on the bottom? And if you work on something random, then what's the chance? What's the probability of that task being actually truly important, right? So instead, what we want to do is we want to take that list and reflect it onto the 2 dimensions of how important is it and when do you have to get that done. And so if you were to look from that perspective, what are the things that you have to do now, right? Because they're actually really critical. They're actually necessary for you to get to your goal. And then they're actually due real soon. So you actually get started. And actually, this is called firefighting. And so what that really means is that you've actually done a pretty poor job of planning. And by the way, I say that in a very positive way, because that actually happens to all of us. We let things brew, and then after a while it becomes fire, and we're like, okay, I got to, spend all my time and effort to do this now. And that's quadrant 1. And then what are the things that are actually important, but actually a little bit further out, that you can start actually spending time and plan for, and that goes in quadrant 2. And then what are things you can delegate? And when I say delegate, you don't have to actually necessarily have a direct report that will do some of these things, but instead think of delegating as a way to outsource it to somebody else who can do a better job, or some system out there that can do a better job of managing or actually executing on these tasks for you. And then finally, the inbox. So the inbox is sort of your catch-all. Everything goes here. So now this list that you've just made really started in the inbox, right? These are all the things you have to do. And now take them and start putting them into the appropriate quadrants. Ideally, you don't have more than a quarter of the things that you have into the quadrant 1, and then a quarter into quadrant 2. And that's what you want to do, because you actually want to make sure that not everything is important and urgent. If everything is important and urgent, then nothing is. And so the way that you want to think about Party Matrix as a software, Party Matrix takes this and turns it into a digital form. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to take this list, this matrix that you've just made, and walk around the office and compare notes. And this is the most interesting part. Imagine if you took your work priorities and you walk to your manager and you say, hey, by the way, these are my priorities. Do you agree? And then your manager does the exact same thing, and you're like, hey, these are my priorities. Do you agree? And then what happens is that you're going to start seeing whether or not you agree on some of these key tasks. And the most fascinating thing about all of this is that success from using Party Matrix isn't about finding what everyone agrees on. It's about discovering disagreement. And this is not so obvious, because If your organization is always lying, if everyone knows exactly what they need to work on at any point in time across all projects and all areas of responsibilities, you don't need our software. In fact, you don't need any software whatsoever. Because you can just focus on executing. But my take on where Party Matrix adds the most value is that we help you identify what are the things that you shouldn't work on. Because if your manager says, hey, by the way, I don't think this is high priority, why is it in quadrant 1? Now you can actually just move that to quadrant 2 or get rid of it completely. So if we're able to save you time by removing the work that you don't have to do, then we've actually just added value in a very subtle manner, but in a very important manner. And many customers, many users of Party Matrix find that this is the hardest part. Putting things into the 4 quadrant is extremely difficult, extremely challenging, and that is why it's important, because we cannot procrastinate on prioritization, right? Because if you're working on the wrong thing, doesn't matter if you do a great job of it, you're working on the wrong things. And so doing the wrong things right is actually probably worse than not doing anything at all. So one thing I want to remind everybody is that if you haven't gotten started with Party Matrix, if you go to affluence.com, that's where you get started and you learn a little bit more. Also, these webinars, as well as other webinars in the past, are on webinars, our webpage there. And so the recording will also be available there. And of course, never hesitate to reach out to us, support at Affluence, if you have any questions. With that, I'm going to go into showing you the product itself, because now how do we actually do those things that I mentioned? How do we actually leverage Party Matrix to achieve those goals? So here is Party Matrix. As you can see, when I open Party Matrix, I actually have right in the middle here those 4 quadrants in a very similar structure to what I showed you in the presentation, right? You have the quadrant 1 that's due now, the quadrant 2 that's due later, the things you can delegate, and the postpone / inbox here. And so this is a project that I call my personal priorities. And so here I want to track all the things I need to do and all the things that I want to accomplish. So creating a task is very, very easy. I can go to add item here, right? And I can choose what quadrant it goes in. And let's say I want to plan for something that's later. And so let's just imagine one of the things I want to do is find 3 new books to read. And what happens, I can also say due in 1 week. So what Party Matrix is doing is it helps me create the task, but at the same time, we use natural language to go and interpret this due in 1 week as a goal. And so therefore, it'll actually set a due date for me automatically. So when you create tasks in Party Matrix, don't be afraid to actually just write in there, oops, actually due in 1 week here. I think. So don't be afraid to actually set due dates and so forth, because when you set due dates in Party Matrix, it actually really helps you understand how it fits in within the bigger picture. And you see how the fact that I put due in 1 week there, it actually sets a due date for me automatically, and then it'll show in my calendar, I'll get reminders and so forth. And so this is the context that you see within Party Matrix, which is everything fits within these 4 quadrants, and you have to put them into those quadrants. And that's almost on purpose, because again, when you do that, then half the work is done in deciding what needs to work on what and so forth. And so imagine if I actually want to remove this to somewhere else, I can actually just drag and drop. Within the task itself, on the right-hand side, this is called the item details. And item details really just lets you add additional context, additional information around the task. So for example, I can say who's the owner. I can say progress, effort, due dates, and reminders. And one thing that's really interesting here is the difference between due dates and reminders. Imagine if you have something that's due in 3 months, right? You're working on a task for a critical project, and that's due in 3 months. But if you wait for 3 months to get started, that's going to be too late. You're not going to get that done in time. So instead, what you want to do is you want to set reminders. So for example, I want to say due in 3 months, but I'm going to say remind me weekly. And so when you type these things into Party Matrix, again, we use natural language to interpret that for you and then set the appropriate due dates and reminders. And so what I've just done is that Party Matrix will now ping me and remind me that I really need to tackle this. And then the second thing that you can do about Party Matrix is actually you can star task as well as, and the reason you want to star task is actually, it's just a way of signifying that this is something that's extra important. So we're looking for signal all the time to identify what are the things that's actually truly important, especially if you have more and more tasks than the resources to do them. And then if you look down further, you have notes, which is where you can add subtasks as well as additional information. And then the resources. And resources, you can think of emails, and you can think of You can think of emails or documents or presentations or whatever they might be that actually is relevant to this particular task. So now one thing I want to sort of talk about next is goals. And the reason I want to talk about goals is because one of the things that we've added recently is this concept of leveraging artificial intelligence to help you meet your goal. So as an example, let's say you want to get a promotion to senior project manager, right, and get a raise. So when you type this into Matrix and click on Build My Action Plan, one of the things that's going to happen is that Matrix will go and take that goal and build out the action items for you as a baseline for you to get started. I'm really excited about this, and if you have a lot of quarterly goals and either on your personal level, or you can even have a goal at your department level, right? How do I streamline my operations? How do I go and increase sales? Or how do I improve my marketing? Or how do I improve my website? So what we're doing is we're taking this simple goal and leverage the knowledge of the world out there to actually build the action items as well as the priorities that you need to tackle that. So now I'm going to go back to here. And in fact, that is running right now. But for example, previously we've created a project that says increase sales by 20%. And so when you have that simple goal, Party Matrix goes and build out that 4 quadrants for you. And again, this is a baseline for you to get started. And now you're able to start working towards your goals using the prioritization method that we talk about here. And then you can say, okay, these are the low effort, high impact tasks that I can do, and then high effort, high impact tasks, right? If you have limited resource and time, quadrant 1 and 2 is where you want to spend all your time, where you actually start working towards your goal. And you see how my promotion to senior project manager project was actually completed. That's what I typed in earlier. I click open action plan. And when I go here, what Party Matrix has just done is, again, tell you what are some of the things that you can do to actually work towards that goal. And so, by the way, all of this is generated live. I have no idea what our system will make. And that's sort of the beauty of all of this is. And so you can use this, and it's never going to be perfect, but you can use this as a starting point and then update them as needed. So if you want to try that out, I'm going to go ahead and send you the link here within the chat. This is something that you can start using today inside Party Matrix, and you can have many, many different goals. I would go and set personal goals. I would go and set career goals, and I would go and set goals for your company itself, right? The things that would actually help you achieve your bonus or whatever that might be. And then make sure that these tasks are actually, you going back and you're looking at them and you're actually tackling them and see if they're actually helping you to meet those goals. Now, the other thing I want to mention is how do you create projects in Party Matrix, and what is a project anyways? So when you think about what we call projects actually can be many, many different things. Because, for example, here, this is a goal, right? And so this project is a goal, but you might have a project that is a client that you're working for. If you're in real estate investment, maybe a project is a property. And so we have customers that range across the entire spectrum of industry and so forth. And so that is why, we don't call them anything specific. We call them generically project because they're adaptable. And you may have projects that are transient, which means they have a start date and an end date. And you may have a project that's persistent. They'll last forever. So for example, within our own organization, we have projects for each of our software application. So the reason is we always are brainstorming new capabilities or modifications or things that we actually want to improve. And so that project never goes away. Does unless the product itself, that particular product ends, there's no reason for us to have that. And so when you want to create a project, all you got to do is go to this project list and then create a new project. When you create a project in Party Matrix, we actually go and actually give you some templates that you can leverage right away. So you're going to always choose a blank project. If you choose a blank project, it means there's, the matrix itself is blank. But we've also built out best practices over the years. And some of these are actually really helpful. If you're a new manager, or if you're an IT, or if you want to use a matrix for brainstorming, directly from here, you can leverage some of our public templates. And this is in addition to that goal system that I showed you. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a blank project. This new project, okay, we're going to call this new project A. And then from here, you have a couple things you can do. Groups, which means you can actually add this project to the department. So if you're using it at your organization, this might be marketing. And so you can have a whole marketing group of people. And every time you add someone to the marketing department, they get automatically invited to the appropriate project and so forth. I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to choose a color, and now I add a project. So you can see how I created a project, and now I get that same blank slate that I have here. One thing that's actually really interesting is as you use Party Matrix more, my recommendation is start adopting, changing the terminology in Party Matrix to make it match the way your organization thinks. So not everyone think about the do now, do later, delegate, or postpone. As I mentioned, within your own industry, right, there might be best practices or different terminology. So in software engineering, sometimes we use P1 and P2, right, just as a way to signify these are the different priority level. And as long as the team is consistent upon it, you can actually customize the quadrant. Once you customize the quadrant, you can actually go here and save the project as the template. So now what you've just done is you've customized Party Matrix. So then when you launch a new matrix, instead of choosing from a blank matrix that we have, you can actually choose an existing template within your organization. And you can build more and more of these specific to each of your group. Let me give you an example. Imagine if you are a consulting firm, and then whenever you bring on a new client, you have to go and do 30 different things, right? That might be gathering information, that might be billing, that might be market research. And now what you've just done is you've built a Party Matrix with the 30 different tasks, and one might be doing 1 week, one might be doing 3 weeks, and one might be doing 3 months, etc. When you save that project as a template, Party Matrix will go and make that available to your team. And then when you want to bring on a new client, you launch that template instead of a blank project. And what happens is you set the start date, and now all those due dates propagate for you. And the way Party Matrix works too is when I go to a task, when I go to a matrix, I can actually see these tasks in the matrix form, but I can also see it in list form. So with list forms, is really easy for me to see the things that are overdue, but then I can go and switch views over to the calendar, and then I can switch view over to the Gantt chart. So going back to this client project that you've just created, once you've created one of these workflow templates, a standard operating procedure, what happens is that as you launch them, all these other views of Party Matrix gets created for you. So then you're now able to see, okay, this is what I need to get done for this client starting today, and then what needs to be done in a week and so forth. So definitely leverage that, because it's a really, really powerful way to save you a lot of time and resources. One of the things I always want to emphasize about Party Matrix too is that going back to the 4 quadrant here, this tells you what you need to work on right at this moment. But Party Matrix, with the do later quadrants, helps you plan out what you need to work on next. So that's about the future. But then Party Matrix also provides a complete history of everything that you have within the matrix, and that gives you an understanding of the past. So we have to admit that, in the modern world, employee turnover is high. And what happens, people go on leave, medical leave, parental leave, all of those things. And what happens is that within an organization, there are so many things that everyone's working on. It's virtually impossible for one person to have a complete grasp on what's priorities across the whole department or across the whole team. So when you use Party Matrix, when everyone has their goals written down and when everyone has their priorities written down in Party Matrix, you have a full history of all of that. And so when someone is on leave, someone else can take over the project, and they have a full understanding of exactly what the priorities are from the person who's departed. And so when you look at that, and when you click on each of these tasks as well, we have what's called the chat, and the chat is the equivalent of the item history. And so when 3 months later, when you've changed priorities, or when you change due dates, or when you assign a task to somebody else, all of that is retained as part of the record. So think of Party Matrix as a communication tool that, 1, gets everyone aligned today, and then 2, help you understand what you need to work on in the future, and then 3, as a way for you to review the past. So if I were to say, if you only want to use Party Matrix without any of our other integrations or anything else, what I've just shown you is essentially where 20% of the work will get you 80% of the value. What that means is, 1, create a project for your personal goals, create a project for your work goals, use our our goal system to actually generate some goals for you so you can actually start working towards those. And then make sure that the terminology aligns to how you think, right? And then start creating tasks inside Party Matrix, but make sure that you set due dates. Make sure you really set due dates, because um, the way you should think about Party Matrix is it's a communication tool. And so the more information that you have that helps you understand the sort of the various dimensions, right? Again, the dimensions of importance, the dimensions of time. And you saw the dimensions of effort, the dimension of impact. So Party Matrix takes anything that you can think about in these various dimensions and makes it into a 2x2 matrix. So keep that in mind, and that's my one advice for those who wants to get the most out of Party Matrix. So make sure that the terminology for the quadrants align. And then when you create these tasks, make sure that you're actually assigning them to the appropriate people. Always have one owner. And in fact, actually, Party Matrix forces you to have one owner as opposed to multiple owners. I mean, people ask all the time, hey, why can't I have multiple owners? And what happens is that when you have multiple owners, no one is going to get it done because there's no clarity as to who's responsible. So Party Matrix always has one owner for every single task. And the way you assign ownership is you click on here and then you assign to the appropriate person. The other thing I want to show you is actually you can get what's called back to that project details, and you click on this. And here, what happens is under the membership here, you have a project. And when you create a project, maybe it's just start out to you. And so only you can see those tasks, but then you can actually invite other people. So now they also see that matrix with you. So if you were to want to use this with your manager, for example, you want to go and make sure that you invite your manager to the project so they can see your priorities. That's what's really helpful about this is that, we sometimes it's just so easy for others to delegate things to us just because they think that you have the bandwidth for it. But when you use Party Matrix and you're tracking all these due dates and so forth, one thing that you can do is you can communicate to your manager, hey, by the way, these are the 5 things I'm working on already. When you are assigning me something else, I'm not able to get it done, right? Something's got to drop. Something's got to give. And so what do you want me to drop? What do you want me to deprioritize in order for me to prioritize on this other thing? So use this to your advantage when you're talking to others. And then likewise, if you're the manager and you have direct reports, you want to make sure that you're not over assigning them action items beyond their capabilities. And so if you're asking them to do everything, how can you ensure that they will do a fantastic job at it? So Party Matrix actually has what we call reports. And so if you go to reports, you can actually check on the workload report and you can see what everyone's workload is at any point in time over a week or a day or whatever. And so if you're bringing on a new initiative, you can see that, okay, you know what? I need to actually ensure that this is due in 2 weeks as opposed to next week. So when you use Party Matrix, make sure you do that. Go create these projects for each of the things that really matter to you. And then from there, within the tasks themselves, assign to appropriate people, set the appropriate due dates. One thing I want to talk about too is that, you can use Party Matrix to track the nitty-gritty stuff, like very, very basic stuff. But my take is use it to track the things that truly matter. If you're tracking things that are, some tasks that are just easier just to get done without even thinking about prioritizing them, then you're just adding work, right? So with that, I'm going to switch gear. Now I'm going to go and show how we actually tie together all these other systems. One of the challenges that I face every single day is emails. I get a lot of emails. I get, 100 emails, more than 100 emails per day, probably. And so within these emails, the vast majority of them are not important, but some are. So what Party Matrix does is allows you to take these emails and prioritize them and actually be able to go and set due dates on them as well. If you flag emails, that works if you have only a few flag emails. Also, it works well if you're going to get to those emails within a day or two. But if you have an email and you're not able to respond to it for another 2 or 3 weeks, flagging them just creates more and more flag emails, and therefore you'll never really truly understand what is important. So if you go to the Outlook add-in, you can search for Party Matrix, and then when you do, what happens is this. Let's say you have an email, and let's imagine, again, this is an email from a client or your manager or something like that, and you want to prioritize this because you want to make sure that you actually get it done. You click on this ... here, this ellipsis, and you go to Party Matrix and you click Prioritize Email. So what we're doing is we're taking this email, we're actually converting to a task. And so let's see here, new project A here. I'm going to convert this into a task. It actually takes the subject of the email and put as item name, but you can modify this. And guess what? I can choose which quadrant it belongs in. And now suddenly I've taken an email and I've set a due date. I can assign it to the appropriate person, and I can assign to the appropriate project and quadrants directly from here. And now I've just captured that email. What's really neat about this is that when the due date comes, right, I'm reminded to actually open that email and respond to it. And what Matrix does as well is actually uploads the email into the task. So then if you assign this email to another colleague, they can actually open it and respond to it too. The other thing you can do is after you create that task, you see how here this looks just like that item details. You can go and say, remind me in 2 days. And so what you're doing is you're actually setting reminders for you to look at this email again and actually address it. One of the things I like to do personally is when I set a due date, let's say due in 2 weeks, I actually will say remind me weekly. Because for something that's truly important, sometimes I just don't have the bandwidth to tackle it. And so by setting a weekly reminder, it actually brings it back up into my alerts inside of Matrix, and then it actually tells me that, hey, you should take a look at this, because if not, it's going to start getting overdue. So definitely check out our Outlook integrations. Really powerful way to manage emails. The other thing that actually is really unique about our solution is the ability to attach email to an existing task. So what happens all the time is you have a task that you're already working on, right? For, again, an external party. And then what happens is they'll send a follow-up email, and now you want to go and take that email, and it doesn't belong in a new task, it belongs in an existing task. So the way it works in Matrix is you can also go ahead and open up Matrix here. Again, this right panel opens up. You can pin it, by the way, if your screen size is big enough, you can pin it. And if you pin it, then whenever you open a new emails, Matrix just shows up on the right-hand side here. So that's actually pretty helpful. But then you can search for that task, and actually you can go and hover over an existing Matrix task and attach the email to an existing task. This is super, super, super helpful in customer service. This is super helpful in managing tasks for external parties. This is super helpful to actually organize all your emails into the appropriate task instead of actually just having create new action items. This is not something flagging will solve. This is unique to Matrix. And so if you're not doing this already, definitely do that. The other thing I want to mention is how Matrix ties into Microsoft Teams. So we're probably the most integrated solution inside Microsoft Teams. So here, for example, if you go to the Teams App Store, you can. I'm opening Microsoft Teams right here. If you go to the Teams App Store, you can search for apps, install Matrix, and then I recommend that you right-click on here and pin it. Once you do, Matrix exists inside Teams. So that means if you're using Teams, you don't have to switch to our web app. You don't even have to go to a browser. Instead, from Teams itself, you access Matrix. You see the same list of projects here. You see the details here. You can open each of these projects. You can see the priorities and do that everything from here. But this is where it gets better. One of the things that we hear all the time is context switching is a huge problem, right? How often is it that you went from one software application, switch to another software application? And imagine a simple use case. You're using Microsoft Teams, and then your manager says, hey, hi, could you do this for me? Okay. If it was a very simple thing, sure. But what if it's a very complicated thing that requires actually quite a bit of attention? And then you want to go and track that within the bigger picture across all the different tasks that you have. So the way it works in Matrix is, imagine if you're chatting with your manager, and your manager say, hey, could you send me a report? I can literally hover over this and click on here, the ... and say create PM item. And what I've just done is actually I can convert any comment, any conversation into a task inside Matrix. I can choose the project. I can choose the quadrant directly from here. I don't even have to switch out of here and go into Matrix to do that. And here's one more unique capabilities inside Matrix, which is we link back to that moment in time in history when you had that conversation. The use case for this is the following. Let's just say you're in a conversation with your manager. It was 6 months ago, and you talked about a lot of different things. And then from there, you had a task. So when you create that task inside Matrix, you can jump back to that moment in history You can jump back in that moment of history where you were talking about those specific tasks, and you can review everything you've talked about. So that's a very unique capabilities, because more so than ever before, we kind of forget the origin of some of these tasks and priorities and so forth. And so we want to ensure that you actually have access to that. And so that's what this link message is. You click on that and you jump back. Our system will take you back into Teams to that moment in history. The other thing I want to talk about is how Party Matrix actually integrates into your meetings as well. So one of the things you can do is, if you click on this tab here and you choose Party Matrix, you actually get a couple of different options. One, you can actually add what's called a full project view. What that is you can think of a full project view as a way to embed one Party Matrix project into a tab, either in a one-on-one chat with somebody or in a Teams channel. Let me give you a use case. Let's just say you're working on a proposal, and for that proposal, you have a Microsoft Teams team in place for it. So you're going to want to have that proposal inside Party Matrix so you can track all the priorities. That's a perfect use case for you to add a full project view, because then when you have that full project view, everyone who's in that Teams channel can open this and see the priorities just for that specific context without having to, go to Party Matrix or switch applications. But the other thing we have is that what's called a one-on-one view. Again, this is a unique capability inside Party Matrix. So for example, let's just say I'm here. Let's say I talk to my direct report. I've already added the one-on-one view here. When I go to the one-on-one view, what happens is I can select that person, but now I see all the tasks I have in common with that person across all of my Party Matrix. And this is that people-centric view that I talked about earlier, right? Instead of having to go to Party Matrix or any project management software at all and going through each project to see what are the things that my direct report's working on, or what are the things I owe my manager, I can just go to this single view and see everything I have in common with that person. When I say in common, what does that mean? It means that either I'm the owner or the other person's the owner and I'm a follower. You see how if I click on each of these tasks, both of us are on here. This task has another person too, but that doesn't matter. Essentially, it's identifying things we have in common. The other beautiful thing about this is actually I can add share tasks directly here. So think about the use case. You have a one-on-one meeting with your direct report, and you're talking about, hey, could you work on this, or what's the status of this other task? Instead of having to go through all the projects, you can actually see all the tasks, and now you can just jump to them directly and start working on them and start prioritizing them. Secondly, when you come up with new tasks, you can actually just type it directly here, right? I can actually come up with that task. I can set the due date. And what's neat about Party Matrix is actually it assigns to the other person and invites you as a follower. So when this particular task gets updated, you're automatically notified of those important changes. So this will save you so much time because you're not switching to another application just to create the shared task. Additionally, you don't have to wait until you have your one-on-one to know the status of things. Imagine this, you want to know whether or not your team members are actually working on those things that you asked them to do last week. You can just go to here and see all of those tasks and see whether or not they've been modified, which means they've been updated, or whether or not it's overdue, right? You see how all these tasks are overdue. It's very, very easy to see them because they're red. And so the list view here is very helpful to identify those overdue items. The other thing that I want to mention too is that we have several ways for you to get notified of the changes that are relevant. So we have what's called the Party Matrix chatbot right here, which is again something that you can add in Microsoft Teams. And the chatbot will send you a message whenever, for example, here I have tasks that are overdue, or I have tasks that I set reminders for. It sends me a message. But the other thing is when you open Party Matrix itself, there's this thing called the home view. So if you're getting on board with Party Matrix for the first time and you're bringing on team members and you want to make sure that everyone knows what they need to work on, or you're ensuring that they actually get the right paying attention to things that matter, make sure you go to this home view. When you go to this home view, there's an alert section. The alert section essentially is where all the things that are relevant to you start popping up. The tasks with due dates, the tasks that are that have reminders, or tasks that you are a follower on or that were assigned to you. All of that will show up here. And then as you click through this, it goes away. Think of this as just like an inbox. Think of it as like an unread message. And so as you look at it, it goes away. And then, you want to see something you've seen recently, that's the visit section. And then what I like to do too is once in a while, I just clear all these notifications. So then you have a blank slate. And so then again, whenever you get a new notification, you're able to see it. So with that, I'm actually going to pause for a second. And what happens is that there are actually a lot more capabilities inside Matrix that I'm not going to show. And the reason is, what in this particular webinar, what I want to show you too is just the things that will make the biggest impact, right? So again, I want to emphasize that you don't have to go and boil the ocean with Matrix. You don't have to leverage all of the capabilities. All that really matters is that you're using the 4-quadrant methodology that we've created here inside Matrix as your communication tool for you to see what is really truly important, and that you're working on that, and that again you're communicating this to your team members so then everyone's on the same page. If all the team members that you have within your department or within your direct team or within your whole organization have a priority matrix, and that matrix show them your their own priorities, and you're just comparing notes every time you get together in a meeting room, then I think you would capture so much. And again, identify the things that truly are misaligned, more so than just ensuring that everyone agrees, right? Because when you identify the misalignment, that's when you can save a lot of resources. You can save hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars by getting rid of initiatives, more so than anything else. So I'm going to jump back to the presentation here, and I want to say the following. One, it's on you. And what I mean by that is, no matter how good the software is, no matter what we do here at Affluence, if you don't use Proto Matrix or you don't follow the methodology, there's nothing we can do about it, right? So sign up for Proto Matrix. If you have Teams and Outlook, make sure you get those. I would create at least 3 projects: a personal priorities, a shared team priorities, and then key initiatives. Invite appropriate team members, and then pitch to them on why it's important to focus on high impact tasks. Sometimes, a lot of us are so busy doing things that we don't get time to think about whether or not we should be doing them, which is really fascinating. And then make sure that you create items with Party Matrix, inside Party Matrix with due dates, and then put them in the appropriate quadrants, and then go back and don't drop them. Mark them as done, or change the due dates, right? If they're all overdue, change the due dates if you didn't get them done yet. Otherwise, mark them as done. And then my advice is ruthlessly prioritize. It's your time. If you don't prioritize your time, somebody else will, right? And then one thing I want to talk about is what success with Party Matrix looks like. One, if you're successful in using Party Matrix, it will be the central place to track all priorities. It starts with personal priorities, those are yours, and then your team priorities, and then your organizational priorities. And that everyone's aligned on the key task, and that repetitive procedures are templatized to save you time on future work. And what that really means is that if you have priority levels that you're setting with repetitive tasks, and you save them as template, you're actually you're able to replicate all of that over and over again without having to do so much manual work. And then finally, important emails are prioritized and not forgotten. And hopefully you're able to achieve these goals within Proto Matrix. And hopefully, the software provides a framework for you to think about it. But that's what Proto Matrix is all about. Again, a communication tool. So I see that in the chat section here, we actually have some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look. Are there, okay, one, can I export my matrix to Excel to create reports and updates? So the answer is yes. So what happens is every single project here, when you go to here, you have the options here to export a CSV. So what happens is, as you're building out your matrix, you can export that. And in fact, we actually export a lot of details. And then from the CSV, you can actually modify it and even build templates too from there. And then the other thing is actually you can print each of these as well. Every single action item has the ability for you to print the history and all that. And then, of course, you can actually print directly from here. And we also have the Gantt chart, which is pretty helpful. The second, are there commands in the other commands in the chat box? Yes. So there's a lot of different commands. Actually, let me see if I can pull that up here. Gonna see if I can. So if you go to this view right here, I'm going to send you a message inside Teams. That's our command page. And so actually this shows you some of the commands that we have. We actually have some other commands as well that we don't have it listed here, but this is a sort of documentation on some of the commands that we have. The way you know that a command works is that it actually turns green. Whenever the text turns green, it means that our system interprets it and actually is making those changes. Does Party Matrix work in Spanish? Yes. So if you, it's actually so obviously with Party Matrix itself, the information that you put in can be in any language. There's no restrictions, obviously, with the language because it's just data, right? So, but the menus on some of our applications actually should update to Spanish if you're using the localized version. Can you talk to tasks versus calendar events? So the answer is yes. So Matrix integrates into calendars in several ways. First of all, every project inside Matrix has a unique calendar. So when you go to this project details, for example, let's just say if you want to go and you want to add a Matrix calendar, let's say you're working on a really critical project and you have a bunch of different tasks there, and you want to be aware of those tasks inside your calendar. You can go to the project here and get calendar link, and you can subscribe to this as a read-only link inside Outlook. But in Outlook itself, you can see how we actually have what's called integrations with Outlook here on the connector page. If you go to connector, you'll see that Party Matrix integrates with Jira, Outlook, Microsoft To Do, Microsoft Planner, Azure DevOps as well. And so when you connect these services to Party Matrix, what's happening is actually pulls these tasks over into Party Matrix as a read-only version. But now if you want to go and ensure that your team members aren't assigning you tasks because you have a lot of things to do, the only way to do that is to leverage our workload management system. So what that means is your manager, really should be pushing for everybody to use Party Matrix so that everyone can be aligned on those on the priorities as well as on the due dates. So when you go to this report here, for example, what I can see is I can see my team members, and then I can see the number of tasks that they have on any particular dates, right? So you can see I can, jump between the different days and so forth, see the tasks that they have. And then the other thing I can do is actually I can look at the effort or schedule hours as other dimensions. So for example, if you have, 40 hours or 60 hours of work already in a 40-hour work week, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to take on more. So that's one thing to think about. And then when you click on each of these, you can actually drill down as well into the details and then reprioritize them or change the due dates. And then what happens is every single person also has a full calendar as well. So you can always share your calendar with your manager, for example. I think it is a little overwhelming, so I don't recommend that because then, your manager can go and, see what your schedule is like inside Party Matrix. But every person has a full calendar that you can subscribe to. It's a good way to stay aligned, but it is a lot of information. These are fantastic questions. Are there any other questions? All right. With that, I'm actually going to go ahead and end the webinar here, give you back a couple minutes of your time. Stay tuned, and we'll actually have webinars that cover other more specific topics as well, especially on the advanced capabilities, because Party Matrix does integrate into Microsoft Meetings and so forth. But I'm glad that this is helpful. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. Thank you all.